I'm Robin of Moxlie, and we've all seen vote shaming over the last few months, and I figured it was past time to do more than just point out that it's a really awful thing to do. The common wisdom for why people fail to vote comes down to two reasons. Apathy, which I contend is a disparaging mischaracterization of non-voters' actual motives, and suppression. Obviously, these two reasons are related, but I don't see their connection being talked about much, so let's go over that. A large portion of the so-called apathy is generated by the artificial difficulties added to voting through the many forms of suppression implemented by the entirety of the American government. Thus, those who choose not to vote due to any of the many difficulties associated with the act, no matter how minor they seem to an observer, have had their vote suppressed. One might claim that such a person might decide not to vote even if every barrier was removed, but there is no way to be certain of that without first giving them that opportunity. So, to shame those who choose not to vote due to the difficulty of the act, whether you are aware of those difficulties or not, is to do harm to someone whose vote is being suppressed. This is a form of victim blaming. As for those who can easily vote, but still choose not to, we must consider the possible reasons for this choice. One reason is the common belief that one's vote has no power to enact change. Now, in an extremely broad sense, this isn't true. However, we must deal with the reality that for a significant portion of the population, the primary difference between a Democratic president and a Republican one is how naked the corruption and fascism endemic to our entire government is. Our government has always represented the interests of the wealthy to the exclusion of all others. The only way that we have made progress as a society has been by making our desires non-negotiable, thus forcing through direct action the desires of the wealthy to align with our own. This has never been done by simply voting. Moreover, the two dominant options have a long and storied history of directly and willfully harming more vulnerable groups. With our system of voting, we may only vote once, and we may only vote yea. There is no nuance in this method, which means that a vote for a candidate is a complete and unqualified endorsement. To get specific, it is not possible to vote against Trump, but it is possible to vote for Biden, and the reverse is also true. However, a vote for Biden is a statement, whether intentional or not, that the voter finds the crime bill and all the harm it has done at least acceptable, that they are comfortable with segregation, or at least with someone who has publicly supported it far too recently, that they are for the endless military spending and extrajudicial murders carried out through drone strikes, as well as the atrocities committed by both police and ICE. Intentions have no bearing on the results of the actions we take. It is understandable to conclude that we must take unethical actions in order to avoid what seems to be worse outcomes, but that does not render those actions good. Direct action in opposition to the winner of the election, and now we know it's Biden, this still applies, is the only thing that can make this exchange acceptable. Those that decide not to play the game and refuse to vote have not consented, explicitly or implicitly, to the outcome of such an election. I've seen the argument that refusing to vote is equivalent to voting for the opposition, but that doesn't make any sense, and I can prove it using grade school math. Imagine that Jane has an apple, and both Don and Joe want that apple. Jane has three choices. She can give the apple to Joe, give it to Don, or keep the apple. If she decides to keep the apple, which of the boys asking for it ends up with more apples, and how many apples did Jane contribute to them? Now replace the apple with a vote. When you start the process of voting, you have a vote that you can give to any of the candidates on your ballot. Since we can only vote once, and only vote yea or not at all, refusing to vote mathematically does not contribute to the victory of one candidate more than another. The only way that the claim that not voting contributes to a candidate could be true is if we assume that the person was going to vote one way or the other without knowing the candidates, which is nonsense. We vote for candidates, and it is the responsibility of those candidates to earn our votes. The person that chooses not to vote has decided to withhold their consent entirely, refusing to support atrocities no matter who is committing them. To shame such a person for this choice is hypocritical for anyone that votes for the lesser of two evils. The voter has consented to evil. The non-voter has not. Now, I do want to acknowledge that the nature of first-past-the-post voting and the funding rules that we have for the United States pretty much guarantees that there will only ever be two viable candidates and that they will only come from two major parties. That can't really be disputed. That's just the natural result of the system as it is currently set up. However, again, it's important to note that for a lot of people, an overwhelming number, the harm done to them is done by both parties. We have to acknowledge that it is at least understandable that people wouldn't want to contribute to candidates that have done harm to them and their communities and are likely to continue doing harm. The words of politicians are pretty and they're expensive, but they're often bought. The system needs to earn the faith of the people that vote in it. It is not the failure of those people to vote. It is failure of the system to earn their trust. And shaming the people who are disenfranchised or see no hope either way does nothing to build solidarity with them. It does nothing to convince them to vote with you. Another common claim is that not voting is an act of privilege. A study of the 2016 election done by Pew Research, link in the doobly-doo, showed that non-voters were most likely to have a low income and were disproportionately from disadvantaged or vulnerable demographics. The idea that people who choose not to vote have not considered the ramifications to themselves and others is an incredibly privileged perspective, which ignores and undermines the empathy, intellect, and right to choose that others possess. Unless you can be absolutely certain that the person you are shaming is privileged enough to be comfortably unaffected by the results and selfish enough to do nothing to help others and will choose not to vote because of their safety and selfishness, which you cannot know, then you are shaming someone merely for a difference in the moral calculation that they have made. Shame, in such instances, is not the appropriate response. Reason, understanding, and compassion is. Shame is a form of punishment, the rhetorical equivalent of a punch. As such, it is not a reliable way for altering attitudes or opinions, and it is more likely to entrench the targets into their beliefs. The most it can really do is encourage people to be silent. And while that might be useful in cases of hate speech, that is not even remotely equivalent to a vote. If the goal is to change the opinions and behavior of those with whom we disagree, then shame is cutting off one's nose to spite one's face. Voting is the least effective tool for enacting change at our disposal. It is a tool, and we should use it, but it is the least effective of the tools we have. Both parties aren't identical, but they have both contributed to the raging shitfire that we're experiencing now. To shame someone over their choice is grotesque and immoral, unless they vote for Trump. Seriously, it's the only wrong choice. No matter who wins any election, we are going to have to fight for change, because no politician will make it happen for us. So stop shaming people, grow a fucking spine, and get your brick-throwing arm ready. We have work to do.